So picture this, February 1943. A group of Germany's top engineers are gathered around a captured American M4 Sherman tank. They're expecting to find something crude, simple, to confirm their own feelings of superiority. But what they discovered inside this one tank was so profound, so shocking. It basically told them Germany had already lost the war. This is the incredible story of how a single machine exposed a fatal flaw in an entire ideology. At the time, German confidence was absolutely sky high. You have to remember, Nazi propaganda was blasting this message everywhere. Their new Panther and Tiger tanks were paragons of technical genius. They were seen as literal proof of Aryan superiority, these massive, terrifying machines designed to dominate the battlefield. And this wasn't just talk for the masses, it was a deeply held belief right at the very top of the Reich. And then this tank shows up at their top-secret Kummersdorf proving grounds. It was pulled from the sands of Tunisia, an M4 Sherman, serial number 3067641. The Germans even give it a nickname, War Daddy 2. And just looking at it, it seemed kind of simple, almost agricultural compared to their sleek, predatory Panzers. But this unassuming tank held a massive secret they were just about to uncover. And here's the crazy part. The evidence wasn't a bigger gun, it wasn't thicker armor, it was something way more fundamental, something that flew in the face of their entire engineering philosophy. It was a warning sign that this war wouldn't be won by the most impressive weapon, but by a completely different kind of logic. Okay, so to really understand why this was such a bombshell, we have to first talk about the myth of German steel. I mean, even today, there's this persistent idea that German tanks were just better. And honestly, when you look at the stats, it's pretty easy to see why people thought that. I mean, just look at this. On paper, it's not even a contest. The German Panther outweighs the Sherman by a whopping 15 tons. It has way thicker frontal armor, and it's carrying a high-velocity cannon that could punch right through a Sherman from a long way off. In a straight-up, one-on-one duel, the math seems obvious, right? The Panther should win, every single time. But here's the thing, war isn't fought on paper. So let's go back to the Kummersdorf Proving Grounds. The chief technical evaluator, a brilliant designer named Major Kienekamp, is leading his team as they start taking War Daddy 2 apart, piece by piece. As they peeled back the layers of the tank, they found good quality steel, a simple but really robust suspension. But the real jaw-dropper came when one of the engineers, Franz Weber, opened up the gearbox. He just stopped, stared, and immediately called his boss over. Because inside were these precisely machined helical herringbone gears. And that changed everything. And this right here, this gets to the heart of two totally different ways of thinking. See, German tanks used something called spur-cut gears. In theory, they were super efficient, but they demanded perfect manufacturing and were incredibly brittle. The slightest mistake, the tiniest amount of stress, and boom, they'd shatter. The Sherman's herringbone gears, on the other hand, were standard issue from the American auto industry. They were more forgiving, way more durable, and designed from the ground up to be mass-produced. And the result? A Panther's transmission might last 1,500 kilometers if you got really, really lucky. The Shermans could go more than double that, easy. But the genius wasn't just in the individual parts, it was how you could get to them. The Germans actually ran a test. They gave a team of their own mechanics the Sherman's manual and some basic tools. And these guys, who had never seen a Sherman before, did a complete field service, oil, filters, tracks, in under 6 hours. You could swap the entire engine out in less than 4 hours. To do a similar service on a Panther, that would take days and require specialized cranes and equipment, probably in a depot far behind the front lines. So here's what the German engineers started to realize. They weren't just fighting a tank, they were fighting an entire system. A system built on a totally different kind of math. The math of logistics, of reliability, and of overwhelming industrial power. And that brings us to the numbers, the cold, hard data that really told the story of the war. Just look at this. It boils down to a simple percentage called operational readiness. Basically, how many of your tanks can actually go out and fight on any given day. For American Sherman units, that number was consistently over 80%. For the mighty Panthers, it was often below 40%. A superior tank doesn't do you any good if it's broken down in a ditch miles behind the battle. But the most important number wasn't even about readiness. It was about pure production. And here it is, the knockout blow, the production ratio. For every single Panther or Tiger tank Germany managed to build, the United States churned out more than 6 Shermans. America built nearly 50,000 of them. So even if a Panther could knock out 5 Shermans before being destroyed, which it couldn't, there was always a 6th and a 7th and an 8th rolling right off the assembly line. And this wasn't some kind of accident. This was the result of a complete and total industrial mismatch. The war was being won thousands of miles away from any battlefield in American factories.
Think about it. In the US, you had this mature civilian auto industry, giants like Ford and Chrysler, that just pivoted their expertise to building tanks using proven mass production techniques. Their workforce was motivated, well-paid, and safe. Germany, on the other hand, was relying on specialized, almost custom manufacturing. As the war dragged on, they became more and more reliant on slave labor, which understandably led to widespread sabotage. And maybe most critically, American factories were safe, while Allied bombers were systematically taking out key German plants, like the ones making the Panther's engines and, yes, those brittle transmissions.
So, Major Kniepkamp and his team wrote it all down. They put together a detailed and, frankly, devastating report that laid out the stark technical and industrial truth. They sent it right up the chain of command, a crystal-clear warning that Germany's entire approach to armored warfare was fundamentally, fatally flawed. Even the head of German armaments, Albert Speer, he knew the truth. After seeing a Sherman demonstration for himself, he admitted privately that the Americans had built a tank that works, while Germany built tanks that impress. And his conclusion is really the theme of this whole story. In a long war, working defeats impressive every time. But publicly, the Nazi ideology of technical superiority couldn't be challenged. The report from Knipkamp's team was ignored, filed away as being overly pessimistic. The consequences of ignoring that report were catastrophic. A 1945 German investigation found that hundreds of their most elite tanks were never even destroyed by the enemy. They were simply abandoned by their crews after their own complex mechanics, especially those brittle final drives, just gave out. The Panther's greatest enemy wasn't the Sherman, it was its own over-engineered design. The story of War Daddy 2 is so much more than just a history lesson. It's this powerful reminder that sometimes the relentless pursuit of perfect can be the enemy of good. The Sherman wasn't the best tank on paper, but it was reliable, it was maintainable, and there were a lot of them. It was good enough. And that really leaves us with a critical question to think about, right? In our own work, in our projects, in our lives. How often are we chasing some unattainable ideal of perfection when what's really needed is a solution that